Hello and welcome to Amagi, co-hosted by myself, Nima of economicsjunkie.com, and Dylan Moore of the Volitional Science Network, which you can find on YouTube. We are here to tackle ideas both ancient and modern in an effort to bring you the tools needed to expand the power of your worldview, making you a more potent entity, professionally, politically, philosophically, or otherwise. We are graciously being hosted by the Think Liberty Network, which you can find at think-liberty.com. This is episode 20, Vaccine Safety. Hi, Dylan.
Hey, Nima.
I guess you are particularly interested in the topic of vaccines. Why is that?
Yeah, I got my wife pregnant. So.
Oh, shit.
I don't know what happened. It was just, she wasn't pregnant one day and she was pregnant the next. Haven't figured out the cause and effect relationship to that one yet. But we're working with a midwife, and she's been pretty good, and we're getting to the point where we have to start talking about vaccines. And just to let everyone know, I am a little biased on this. I lean toward the anti-vaccination side of things. However, now that I'm bringing a human child into existence, it's one thing to say I think this is all bullshit. It's another thing to be like, oh man, I got to make the right decision here because somebody else's health and well-being and life depends on it. So I'm getting into the research, and our midwife recommended a book, actually 2 books for me to read, but the one that I decided to buy is called, I got it here in front of me, The Vaccine Book, Making the Right Decision for Your Child. And this is written by Robert W. Sears, and it says MD FAAP. I'm not sure what FAAP is, but it sounds like a fancy doctor title. And he is a pro-vaccine doctor in this book, doing the best he can to be objective about vaccines. So I'm taking the time to reconsider my position. And while I've been doing this, I guess we stumbled upon a very interesting article, didn't we, Nima?
Oh, yeah.
How long ago was it? What was this? It was just last month, I think, we saw this.
Yeah, like a month or 2 ago, yeah.
So apparently there's a Vaccinegate. Oh, yeah, here it is. December 16th is when this was written. We'll have this in the notes below, obviously. Which is, so the title of this article is Vaccinegate, Initial Results on an Infanrix Hexachemical Composition, which apparently is, this is a vaccine that's for diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, hepatitis B, Haemophilus influenza B, and poliomyelitis 1, 2, and 3. And one of the fascinating things that hit me before we even look at this is that this is someone who this is actually a third party looking into the chemical and biochemical composition of a vaccine. And I feel really weird to say this, that this is something strange.
Right. Should be common practice.
Why isn't this common practice? Why is this some big thing? They're like, oh my God, we actually checked what's in it. And we found some interesting stuff, and we're going to be going over that.
Why isn't this all over the mainstream media? Oh yeah, because they don't give us important information. Sorry.
Right.
Go on.
So me and Nima want to take a look through this article. And I mean, I've already announced my bias. I think Nima's bias will come out here pretty quick. However, I'm reapproaching this with an open mind because I am having a child. I'm going to have to start making decisions on vaccines. And in fact, this will be pretty good because the one I already have to make a decision on is called the DTaP vaccine, which stands for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, which are 3 of the 6 that are in this Vaccinegate vaccine, so we have a nice overlap there. I'm taking the time to go back and look over this, and with a healthy skepticism toward my own initial bias. And what I'm finding is I might be staying with my initial bias based on what we found. So, Nima, did you just want to start going through this article and see what we unpack?
Yeah. Take it away.
All right. So this is quoting from the article. When we is this organization Corvelva, I think is an Italian organization. So when we started these analysis, yes, they must not have English as their first language. When we started this analysis, from the metagenomics to the chemical ones, we had a lot of questions and we were only looking for answers. After these first results, more questions have arisen and so did the concerns. The qualitative analysis of organic compounds is of great importance in the pharmacological field, as potential safety problems arise from the new production processes of biological drugs and from the complex structural and biological characteristics of these products. Let me step back a second, see if I can help translate this. I've mentioned before, I majored in chemistry. I took one whole whopping quarter of biochemistry, so we're going to straddle the line here of my chemical and biochemical knowledge, because it goes into both once we get into vaccines. But essentially, when we're looking at biochemistry, particularly versus organic chemistry, biochemistry starts to get so complex with particularly once you start getting into proteins and putting together amino acids, that a protein has to not only specifically be built out of specific amino acids, it actually has to be in a very specific shape. And I remember it was actually, I think from high school, my biology teacher emphasized form is function. So even if you have a protein that has the correct structure, if it's not in the correct form, if it hasn't wrapped itself around itself properly, it's not going to work right. And so I think what they're trying to say here is, as we're making strides and new efforts into creating new biological drugs, and we're working with these incredibly complex and big proteins and biological drugs, there's a lot of potential side effects that we could be, side products that could be arising from these things, because, like I said, they're just so big and so complex. So the article goes on to say, in the Infanrix hexa, we found 1, chemical contamination from the manufacturing process or cross-contamination with other manufacturing lines. 2, chemical toxins. 3, bacterial peptide toxins. And 4, insoluble and indigestible macromolecules that react to the protein assay but cannot be recognized by any protein database. What we have not found was any protein antigens of diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, hepatitis B, influenza, or poliomyelitis, and they have not found any formaldehyde or glutaraldehyde, phenoxyethanol, or antibiotic residues that are supposed to be in the ingredients list, like this formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde. They're supposed to be, I think, preservatives or something like that. They help activate the immune system in the location in order to let the body know that there's something there that it needs to pay attention to. So with the...
Do vaccines actually have ingredients lists?
Yes.
That we can see?
Yes. Now,
so before your child gets injected with a syringe, they show you like a...
I don't think they show you
ingredients in it?
I think you have to ask. I think they have to ask for it. And with this book, it actually goes over the ingredients list in all these different vaccines. However, I wanted to talk about that insoluble and indigestible macromolecule, because that might be a little too biochemistry for the average population. Biochemistry-y. So what they were looking for, they said, we didn't find any protein antigens of the diphtheria, the tetanus, and all these other viruses. And of course, what a vaccine is supposed to do is it's supposed to give you those antigens in a non-active form, so your body can defend itself against this virus and develop its own antibodies against the antigens to stop it, to stop the real virus when the real virus comes into the body. So it's supposed to have these antigens of various viruses. Instead, what they did find was this macromolecule that reacts to the protein assay. And so a protein assay, I never ran one of these myself. I just remember learning about it in my biochemistry class, which is essentially the relationship between amino acids and proteins is, think of an amino acid like a brick and a protein like a house. So you build your proteins out of your amino acids. There's 21 fundamental amino acids. I had to have them all memorized at one point for my tests in my biochemistry class. And what the protein assay does is it's a technique that allows you to see if you have a protein isolated, and you use this technique, it'll actually show you what amino acids make up that protein. So what they're saying is they found this macromolecule, they didn't know what it was, they did this protein assay on it, and it came up with amino acids, showing that, okay, this looks like it is a protein. However, when we go back and we try to compare this protein that we figured out what this, the structure of it, when we try to compare it to any protein database, nothing is being found. And I think as we get into the article a little bit more, what the idea is that all these antigens that were supposed to be in there individually have been hooked together to form one massive macromolecule that doesn't do anything. And this is going back to what you said about the ingredients list. Because we could argue about what's on the ingredients list and say, okay, that's good or that's bad. But what this study is finding is what's on the ingredients list may not be what's actually in the vaccine.
Right. I mean, even the people who firmly believe that vaccines work and protect you from diseases, you should always ask, or you should always be skeptical about what you're being injected with in this particular moment. You're in a hospital with your child, and the hospital has ordered a batch of supposed vaccines from some corporation who's telling you that this is in it and that is in it and it does this and that. But how do you know? You don't. You're taking it on faith. And that's a religious approach. That's not scientific or skeptical or curious or interested. That's when science becomes a religion, in my opinion. That's when the word science is used to cover for what's actually just religious dogma. Right.
Well, and then I think it's worth pointing out, I don't have any problem with the idea of a vaccine. Like, as we said before, the idea that, okay, we're going to use a dead antibody, or a dead antigen from a virus in order to get your body to produce antibodies that it normalized would have produced against the real virus, so you don't have to actually go through the actual disease in order to produce these antibodies.
Yeah, I think there's little doubt that vaccines can work, and that there are vaccines that do work. The question is, what are you being injected with in this particular moment at this particular hospital, and how do you ensure that it's safe and what's in it? It's an incredible leap of faith to make assumptions when it comes to that.
In the Infranrix, this is a really weird name, Infranrix hexa, there are 6 antigens: tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis toxoids, D antigens of poliomyelitis 1, 2, 3, hepatitis B proteins obtained with genetic engineering, and Haemophilus polysaccharides chemically linked to tetanus toxoid as a carrier. So toxoids are created by treatments with formaldehyde and glutaraldehyde that should remove toxicity, keeping intact their ability to stimulate protective antibodies against the original toxin. So, okay, that's what the formaldehyde and glutaraldehyde is supposed to do, which is you take the virus, the toxic thing, and you hit it with this formaldehyde or glutaraldehyde to kill it while simultaneously keeping the structure so your body can, form antibodies against, that'll work against the real thing. So the article goes on to say, we were expecting to find the 3 toxoids and other antigens not modified by treatment with formaldehyde and glutaraldehyde, to separate the antigens from each other and to be digestible by the enzyme specific for the proteins, which apparently is trypsin. So again, going back to what we were talking about before, these 6 antigens were supposed to be individual. And what they're saying for it to be digestible by this enzyme is they wanted to introduce an enzyme and have that enzyme react with the individual proteins. The article goes on to say, we found instead a real polymer, which kind of sounds like this thing is kind of like a plastic. We have found instead a real polymer, insoluble and indigestible, that we suppose to be the set of antigens chemically bound together, on which we can find in the literature and partial information regarding the single antigen. Sorry, you can definitely tell that English was their second language here. But this is what I said earlier, which they're thinking that these 6 individual antigens have, for whatever reason, been bound together to essentially create this polymer that you can't interact with, so it's essentially a piece of plastic floating around in this vaccine. And it says this macromolecule could not be recognized in any way by the protein database, and in fact turned out to be a solid compound of an unknown chemical structure. So maybe it's those 6 things linked together, but they're not sure yet. Going on. The protein solubility and their digestion, which is their capacity to divide them into small peptide fragments. And these small peptide fragments is just a couple of amino acids put together. So it's essentially when they're saying their digestion, we're trying to break them down further, but not all the way into their individual amino acids. Protein solubility and their digestion are 2 typical protein characteristics that not only makes it possible to study them through specific analysis methods, but are also fundamental for the interaction with the immune system to create protective antibodies. Because if the protein structure is heavily altered from the original one, the new antibodies result completely different from those that are able to attack the original antibodies causing the illness. So, if you introduce this Frankenvirus in here, and your body creates antibodies against this Frankenvirus, well, that doesn't do anything. You just have antibodies against a fake virus.
Just in case it hits you.
Yeah, just in case it hits you ever. Yeah. This polymer, going on, we have encountered, derived from the antigenic mix, is not only different for its spatial conformation, but it's chemically different. So we can state that we are not facing antigens similar to the original ones, but in the form of a compound with an unknown and unpredictable toxicity and efficacy. Which, I think the statement is just obvious. There's something in there that we don't know what it is, so we obviously don't know how toxic it is or if it's effective at doing the original thing that it was supposed to be doing.
That's quite incredible.
It's unbelievable. It's just... what?
I mean, that right there should turn everyone to a skeptic.
Yeah, and this is...
It has unpredictable toxicity.
Well, and...
I mean, what the hell?
Well, and as we'll talk about in a bit, the unpredictable toxicity of this protein that's really long... This might be due to my lack of knowledge in biochemistry. I know just enough to maybe shoot myself in the foot with it. But a super long protein, just like I said, it just sounds like this quasi plastic molecule that just kind of bounces around and doesn't do anything. But the unpredictable efficacy is the one that's really getting me, where you're going, okay, well, what the hell am I taking it for then? And if this thing's in it, what else is in it that we don't know? So let's keep reading and see what they found. Not only have vaccine antigens not been detected, there were also 65 signs of chemical contaminants of which only 35% is known. This is what freaks me out. There are among these various processing residues and sorry, again, you can tell an Italian wrote this. There are among these various processes, residues, and cross-contaminations from other manufacturing lines, and their identification will be checked during the second level of analytical study. It says, i.e. with standard controls. I guess we could assume that analytical study means standard controls, but you never know these days with the way that science has become religion. The article goes on. Actually, pause. Nima, there's 65 signs of chemical contaminants, of which 35% are known. 65! And we've only identified 35% of them. All the stuff that was supposed to be in there we didn't find, and then we found the 65 things that we can only figure out what 35% of them are.
Yeah, but inject your kid with it and don't ask questions, and if you do, you're stupid, okay?
Yeah, okay. So moving on. 7 chemical toxins among these signals have also been identified, probably deriving from chemical contaminants of the manufacturing process or other manufacturing lines at the vaccine manufacturing site. You know, sorry I'm interrupting this, but you know when you buy some food from the grocery store and on the package, like you'll buy some peanuts and then on the package it'll say something like this product was produced in a facility that also did soybeans and walnuts and milk products and all this sort of stuff. Because, you know, there's some people who are so allergic to some of these things that the fact that the product even touched something that touched walnuts in the past could be enough to trigger a walnut allergy. So we go to that level for some snack food at the grocery store. But if you have cross-contamination at a vaccine manufacturing site, thou shalt not ask questions. Going on, these toxins have a structure that could probably be partially derived from the formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde, cyanogen bromide reaction with other chemical contaminants in the vaccine. We'd like to point out that the toxicity of many of these toxins have been confirmed and published in the PubChem or ToxNet. I guess they must be public resources on chemicals. And this poses important safety problems, issues, and concerns. No shit. So maybe that explains where because at the beginning, remember, it said they didn't find any formaldehyde and they didn't find any glutaraldehyde. Which is remember, these are the 2 chemicals that are supposed to be the ones that kind of neuter the vaccine antigens while still leaving their structure so you could form proper antibodies against them. What they're suggesting here is these chemicals that were in the vaccine seem to have reacted with these other chemicals in the vaccines that we don't know what they are, and we're getting derivatives or new chemicals that have been reacted with the formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde, and this cyanobromide.
Basically, we're just getting a giant poison stew that they were supposed to inject. Of unknown poison stew.
It's like, okay, let's mix all this stuff together in the stew. We don't know what reacted with what, and throw it in there, and there we go.
Yeah, but just shut up and stop asking questions.
Stop asking questions.
Inject yourself with poison and don't ask questions. Incredible.
Going on. For the protein and peptide fraction study, various free peptides of bacterial origin have been obtained, probably coming from the bacterial culture cells used for the antigen extraction. Literature reports bacterial peptides as potential allergens and also as capable of inducing autoimmune reactions, and these too put a safety issue that needs to be further clarified with the regulatory bodies. Now, I don't know what the vaccine makers and the doctors who prescribe vaccines say is normal about the vaccine. So what this is saying is, again, they looked at that protein assay where they broke down the protein into the various further fractions. So a protein is a whole bunch of amino acids stuck together. A peptide is a few amino acids stuck together, and the amino acid is kind of the fundamental building block of biochemistry, or proteins. Not biochemistry is more than just amino acids. They found free peptides of bacterial origin. Now remember, vaccines are supposed to be against viruses, not bacteria, and it's suggesting here that this bacterial origin may be coming from the bacterial culture cells used for the antigen extraction. So in order to create the vaccine in the first place, that, they had to grow it in something, and they picked up some antigens from the bacteria. But again, were you going to tell us that? Did you check for it? What antigens are these? What do they do? And the article goes on, and it's got references for there's 2 references for this sentence alone. Literature reports bacterial peptides as potential allergens and also capable of inducing autoimmune reactions, which again, this puts the safety issue that needs to be further clarified with the regulatory bodies. So we're seeing unknown contaminants reacting with the chemicals that are supposed to be in with the vaccine in the first place, and bacterial antigens that we have no idea what sort of reaction these are going to have, other than the fact that we know that they, at the very least, can cause potential allergic reactions and autoimmune reactions. Woo!
So it could make you allergic, in other words, for the rest of your life. Is that what that means?
I don't know if it's going as far as to say that, but I think any autoimmune damage is going to make you prone to developing allergies later in your life.
Well, because, for example, I don't think 100 years ago people could die from eating. But now there's certain people, who, to your point from earlier, who can die from just eating something that was in a fridge with a peanut. So these kinds of phenomena seem to be could be explained by these vaccines making you more sensitive.
Yeah, and
down the line.
My guess, because I know a lot of the modern allergies that we're experiencing, I think has to be viewed from the fact that we are being bombarded from all sides, whether that's the food, whether that's our lifestyle, whether that's the fluorescent lights and the LED screens that we're staring at all day, whether that's the pollutants in the gasoline that we're burning, or there's a aluminum refinery up the road, or whatever. We're just being constantly bombarded with all this stuff, or the glyphosate in the food that we're eating. I know a big one for allergens is actually our gut health. So I wouldn't straight point at this and say, okay, this is the potential cause and source of all these allergic reactions. I would point at this and say, look, here's another force pushing on it. Of the 20,000 things that we're getting bombarded with to lower our immune system, this is probably another one, and it's probably a very strong one, particularly if we're getting hit with these vaccines as soon as we're born, essentially.
Right.
Which I want to get into the book here in a bit. So finishing up this article, we're almost done. Coming back to the 2 basic principles that have been our topic on this analysis path, we reaffirm what we have said in the recent interview in the scientific journal Nature. Apparently, this is in the scientific journal Nature. We are inquiring the vaccine efficacy and safety, and we can't quite understand how it is possible to claim that this vaccine is even able to generate the 6 protective antibodies. Sorry, I'm stumbling over their use of English here. This is the reason, this is what the vaccine is supposed to be made for. And furthermore, to understand how this cluster of 6 neurotoxic antigens bound together can be claimed as not toxic for newborns.
Because they say so.
Because they say so.
Be my guess.
Infanrix hexavalent. As for the method we have commissioned, casts major doubts on its effectiveness and on its safety. One thing is for sure, we will not stop to proceed. And by proceed, I think they're referring to the fact that there's 65 signs of chemical contaminants, of only which 35% is known. Vaccinegate. I think this is Vaccinegate and a half. And again, I'm just so blown away by the fact that it has taken so long to get a third-party analysis on this, because let's put our super skeptical scientific hat on and step back from this a second. On its own, this analysis doesn't prove anything. What this analysis should be for is to set up a red flag to everybody and say, look, everybody, We need many, many, many independent analyses of this immediately.
The question is, why do we have to look for this stuff? Why isn't this blasted all over the corporate media, the TV screens, the newspapers, the internet? And why do you have to look for anything as soon as it indicates that vaccines can be harmful? Why do we have to look for it? And why isn't it just, why isn't it a huge, important part of the debate? And why, when you search on Google for vaccine safety, why do you only find one side of the story all the time? That should render you more suspicious than anything else, than any individual study like this one, for example.
Well, and on that note, I've noticed something, and again, I try to be as scientific as possible about this because it's very easy for everyone to get very emotional about this subject because it's such a damning issue on either side. Because if one side's wrong, their solution is very, very problematic. Right? If
why aren't doctors who administer this vaccine being summoned for public questioning? Why don't investigative reporters run their doors in and ask them all these questions in this article? And why?
I don't know why the FDA's doors are being pounded down.
Why is the FDA? Because the FDA. Because the doctors
themselves.
Why is it not a scandal of epic proportions? Why aren't people sued for malpractice, for administering stuff that has toxic plastic molecules in it and whatnot? I mean, I'm just trying to convey how far we are from any balanced debate on this topic, right?
Well, it's like fluoride, right? I mean, the toxicity of fluoride, it's so clear, dogma. It's so obvious.
It shows you're dealing with dogma,
and you're labeled
you
crazy.
Can't question it.
Yeah, you can't question it. You're labeled crazy just for saying, I'm not even taking a position yet. Mm-hmm. I just want to talk about it. Oh, right. My God, you're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist. It's like, whoa, dude, I'm just kind of concerned, and I'd like to talk about it.
That makes it even more suspicious, right? If you use talking points that are empty and non-arguments, then I get exponentially more skeptical about their true intentions.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to say is, like I said, even if I approach this from, look, I just want to have a conversation. I have bumped into this, and I've heard stories of other people bumping into this, is that if you even bring up the suggestion to have a conversation about the potential toxicity of these things or the potential safety hazards of these things, people freak the fuck out.
And that's dogma right there.
That's dogma right there. And again, it's like, look, I actually want to have a conversation about this. I'm not going to jump up and down and get on a soapbox and say, okay, the vaccines are bad and the Rothschilds are trying to kill us through this thing that they've been planning on for the last 400 years. Blah, 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 whatever. I'm not trying to do that. I just want to do what we're doing right now, and let's analyze what's actually in the vaccines that we're giving people. And furthermore, I want to emphasize this from my chemistry background. So they're essentially this organization is cracking open a vaccine and pouring it into an instrument and seeing what's the instrument says is in there. I want to emphasize that when I was in university, particularly in my organic chemistry classes, we spent class after class after class after class learning how to use various analytical instruments and how to read the data that they print out in order to figure out the chemical structure of something. It is not easy. It is not easy to figure out the chemical structure of something. In fact, this is actually kind of funny. My first year of chemistry, I did an honors chemistry course my first year at university. The third quarter our professor started the quarter by saying, okay, you're all going to get in groups, and each group is going to get a vial of white powder. Your job by the end of the quarter is to tell me what that white powder is, and tell me with what degree of certainty that you could say that. And so, throughout the quarter, it's like, okay, now we're going to use this instrument with this test, and now we're going to use this instrument with that test, and so on and so forth.
Did you snort it, Dylan?
Oh, nobody said that joke the whole time, Nima. Fuck.
That's so original.
And by the time we would get to the end of the quarter, when after we had learned how to calculate error and read the printouts and data that we got from these various instruments, it was like, okay, this is 25% potassium chloride plus or minus 120% error. And it's 50% magnesium bromide plus or minus 80% error. And we all did these calculations, and we're all getting these error calculations.
Sounds like you don't know what it is actually. Would be the translation to me.
That's exact. And so this is what was so funny. That was the point of the project. Yeah. The professor was trying to show us, this is how hard this is. This is how hard chemistry is. You can't just throw something in an instrument and have it spit out and be like, oh, it's this. That's not how any of this works. You have to really know what you're looking for. You have to have very good laboratory technique, and you have to know exactly what instrument that you're putting it in. And when you get that instrument, you have to know enough about the instrument to say, okay, is what I'm looking at good data or bad data? And when you don't know what you're looking for, because largely what we were doing in organic chemistry classes is we would get a pure substance, and we'd say, okay, do infrared, do nuclear magnetic resonance, do mass spectrometry, do gas chromatograph, and do an ultraviolet. And with all these, you should be able to figure out what that organic molecule is. It's one thing to get a pure substance and run all that stuff and figure it out, and sometimes even then it's really, really hard. It's another thing to say, okay, here's an unknown substance, there's metals in it, there's organics in it, and there's biochemicals in it. There's bioorganics in it.
Well, yeah, I mean, in your case, at least you knew it was a white powder. Yeah. That's already not so bad. That's already helpful. But here's a container with some liquid that has some formaldehydes and some other proteins that have reacted together to produce 65 toxins or whatever. But you have to just accept it and let us inject your kids with it, or else they can't go to public school.
Well, and I want to focus on that 65. Is what I'm saying is they found 65, but we don't even know what's there that they didn't run through the right instrument for. We don't know if they were, were they reading the data carefully enough to say, hey, wait a minute, there's some, this is actually two peaks that are really too close to each other on this gas chromatograph. Yeah, there's two of them here, not one.
Yeah, I think it's just instructive to know how little you actually know about these substances, and just how important it is to be skeptical with what you ingest or inject into your body.
Yeah, and in fact, what I'd like to do is actually go a little bit into this book.
Yeah.
About...
By the way, we don't have to... I mean, obviously we're not going to do this now, but I just saw that there's a bunch of new Vaccinegate studies on the right-hand side of this article. It's apparently part of this blog, where... the articles are also called Vaccinegate, but they looked at
I'm looking at it now myself,
for example. So that's just we can read those and look at them at some other point. But yeah, they looked at Gardasil 9.
Yeah, and that was just other ones. Was that yesterday or 2 days ago? That's 2 days ago that got released. Look at that. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and this is Corvelva. Corvelva.it. Again, it's an Italian website. They got some English errors in here, but you can figure it out.
Well, yeah, and some of these articles are all completely in Italian, but I just click translate, and it's
close enough.
decent translation by Google Translate, I guess.
Gardasil, yeah. But before we talk about Gardasil, the Infanrix, which we've been talking about so far, is actually pretty interesting for me right now, because our midwife is recommending to us right now that we need to look into... Actually, this is the way she phrases it, and I can tell by the way she phrases it that she's legally required to say it, that we need to decide whether or not we're going to do this DTaP vaccine, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, which are three of the things in this vaccine that they looked at, which had 6 different things in it. And so she recommended me this book to read, because you could tell that they're not allowed to say you should or you shouldn't get this vaccine. They have to say stuff like, 80% of parents do this, or 20% of doctors say you shouldn't do that, or they have to talk in statistics for legal purposes. So I'm like, okay, because the DTaP vaccine was recommended not only for the baby once the baby is born, but for everybody who's going to be possibly touching the baby. So that's me, my wife, her parents, and any babysitter, whoever is going to be interacting with that baby. And they want to give it to my wife now. So while the baby is still in the belly, give my wife this vaccine. So I'm like, all right, let's read about it. So I flip to the chapter on the DTaP vaccine. So first of all, what's his name here? Sears. Dr. Sears, or MD Sears, I guess I can't call him a doctor because he's only an MD. He goes over what these diseases are and how dangerous they are and how common they are. And the first thing I found, with diphtheria, which is a specific disease that makes, let's see, it's a severe throat infection. And the question here, is diphtheria common? He writes, no. In the early 20th century, there were about 200,000 cases each year in the United States. In recent decades, there have been only a maximum of 5 cases each year, and the last case reported in the United States was 2003. Now, the story is that, 200,000 cases each year in the United States 100 years ago was taken care of by the introduction of vaccines, which might be true. I don't know. Again, we don't know what was in the vial 100 years ago versus now. But in terms of looking at me individually, I see this and I say, okay, there are no cases being reported anymore. The chance of my child getting diphtheria, pretty darn small. Then it goes on to tetanus, and we're all familiar with tetanus, which is, when you cut yourself on a rusty nail, or if you're like me and you slice your thumb open with a machete when you're 14. That was the last tetanus shot I got, by the way. While I was still getting shots, I sliced my thumb open with a machete while we were hiking through the woods, and I'm like, man, I guess it's time for a tetanus shot. Most people think it only comes from cutting yourself on dirty metal, but apparently there's other ways to catch it too. I can't find it in the book right now, but obviously you can catch it from somebody else who has it. Otherwise, what would be the point of giving it to me before the baby is born? So again, is tetanus common? The answer is no. Each year in the United States, we see about 20 to 50 cases of tetanus. Virtually all occur in adults over 25. Only about 1 case in this 20 to 50 occurs in kids under 5 years old. Then we go on to pertussis, and pertussis is also known as whooping cough, and I actually had whooping cough when I was a child. And if you haven't had it, it's this, or you haven't heard of it, it's this sickness that you get where you get this really wheezing cough, and it can actually be difficult to breathe because you just can't stop wheezing. I remember being pretty miserable as a child when I had it, but it was one of those things like they say about the mumps or these other diseases that or chickenpox. I had chickenpox too. When you get it as a child once, and you're immune for the rest of your life. This one is actually a little bit more common. So under the question, is pertussis common? It says, yes, before pertussis, vaccines came out in the 1940s. There were about 240 reported cases each year in the United States. And when we come to, we were at 25,000 in 2004 and 2005. In 2006, there was 15,000 cases reported. 7 and 8, there was 10,000 cases reported, and there was a slight increase to 14,000 in 2009. So apparently, he says that the pertussis vaccine doesn't work as well as most of the others. It's only 85 to 90% protective because, first, the disease is harder to spot than most, and apparently there's potential new strains that are coming out that the vaccine doesn't protect against. So, again, this is taking all this information for granted, that A, the vaccines work, and that B, that these are the actual numbers of what's going on. So for diphtheria, there's virtually a 0% chance that my child will contract diphtheria. With tetanus, it's statistically so small that it's, not really, I might as well worry about a comet falling on her head if I'm going to worry about something that small. And with pertussis, it is a little bit more common, but I had it. It didn't kill me. He does say that the place that you really have to watch out for pertussis is in very, very young infants, because it can kill very, very young infants. But again, how often does this happen? Let's just leave it at that. How often does this happen? So when we go to the known severe reactions of the DTaP vaccine, and I want to look at percentage of negative reactions. So the common side effects are, let's see, systemic reactions occur in about 25% of children. This is from page 41. Injection site reactions also occur in about 25% of children, but they become increasingly more common and severe with the 4th and 5th doses, 3% of which will cause swelling of the entire arm that lasts up to a week. Now, with these common side effects, this is what I remember being warned about when I was, learning about vaccines when I in elementary school. It's like, it can hurt for a while, but it's better for you in the long run that you might have to deal with this pain. Okay, fine. Let's go to the known severe reactions. About 1 in 1,000 infants will suffer nonstop crying for 3 or more hours, which indicates encephalitis. See page 201. People can do that on their own. About 1 in 14,000 kids will have a seizure reaction. About 1 in 16,000 children will have fever greater than 105 degrees. And then it talks about severe allergic reactions in 1 in a million, which can cause brain injury, coma, and severe seizure disorders that have been very rarely reported. Now, again, that's 1 in a million. So, that's bad, but 1 in a million is really not that many. But if we compare this 1 in 1,000, 1 in 14,000, and 1 in 16,000 of the known severe reactions to the almost nothing for diphtheria, literally nothing for diphtheria, almost nothing for tetanus, and with pertussis, which is whooping cough, a disease that is common for children to get, kind of like chickenpox. So even under the mainstream science, the mainstream scientific narrative, the known severe reactions are way higher of a percent chance happening than the actual sicknesses themselves. And what this book doesn't point out, it will point this out about aluminum, and I want to talk about aluminum. What this book doesn't point out is when you have these severe reactions, they have seizures or they have fevers greater than 105 degrees. The reason that's like the macro visual response, right? That's like, this was so bad that we're actually seeing it at a level that visual to our eyes and to our senses immediately after using it, because a certain threshold of toxicity has been reached, or an allergic reaction has been reached immediately. Well, just because you're just under that reaction threshold doesn't mean whatever these toxins are doing to you aren't doing anything. It's like, okay, well, you took half the cyanide it takes to kill you, so I guess you're okay.
Right. I mean, also, so these kids are experiencing these kinds of traumatic events that you were describing earlier, like swelling or seizures, headaches, fevers in some cases. I mean, that's just the immediately visible effect. But what is actually happening beneath the surface? Are there any lasting damages? I mean, fever is or headaches. A fever indicates that there's some inflammation somewhere in your head. So when you're young, that could have potentially lasting impacts. I think,
Yeah.
Really
Who knows what did you just knock 3 points of IQ off? I don't know.
Right.
Did you just just not destroy, but did you just negatively impact your immune system forever? I don't know.
Well, have you become more prone to autism, for example?
I don't know.
Rates of autism are rising. It's incredible. I was just looking this up. Just from 2004 to 2018, autism rates have increased from 1 in 166 to 1 in 40 or so children, just in the last 14 years.
I want to say a quick thing about autism. So I actually don't think that vaccines have a huge part to play with autism. I'm guessing, like I said before, it's another force that pushes toward it. A book that I recommend reading about effects of autism is actually Dave Asprey's The Better Baby book, which goes into essentially biohacking for pregnant mothers to produce the best babies possible. Obviously, I bought it and got into it, and I'm adjusting my wife's diet and supplement regimen accordingly. But he went over a lot of studies and data in that book saying, look, this is the way that our modern diets and our modern lives have changed, and here's the nutrients that we're missing more often than not. And here's the autism research showing that, again, we're not saying that there's a one-to-one correlation here, but if the mother isn't getting enough of this while she's pregnant, there's a much higher chance that this kid could come out autistic.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the vaccines, the question that's always brought up is, well, do vaccines cause autism?
Well, they could just be causal to a certain degree.
Like I said, I don't think vaccines cause autism. I think it's one more thing that's pushing the immune system, or one more toxin introduced into the body that could push someone toward that. Or 65 unknown toxins, not one more toxin. Just joking. That's not a cause of autism of the toxins that I don't know. Just making it
65 more toxins.
Yeah. I'm just making a joke that there's 65 unknown toxins in here. I'm not saying that unknown toxins cause autism. What are the two things that are brought? Actually, there's three that are brought up a lot when we talk about when I've looked into vaccines in the past, which is mercury, squalene, and aluminum, which are mercury. Is everybody knows mercury is toxic. Like it's so toxic that we put it in our fluorescent light bulbs and hand it out around to everybody, saying that it's good for the environment. No, mercury is so toxic that people are very well aware of the fact that it is toxic. Aluminum is kind of in this so-so spot. Squalene I had obviously never heard of until I ran across it in vaccines, but apparently it's also a pretty nasty chemical compound or molecule. So I was very curious when I finally bought this book, because I hadn't looked into vaccines for like 10 years. But by the time I realized that I had to look into it because I've got a child on the way. So I was very curious and very excited because this doctor, who is a pro-vaxxer, again, this book is for someone who administers and recommends vaccines, that he has a list or an appendix in the back, or a chapter in the back, talking about the different ingredients in vaccines. Now, for mercury, there is still a small amount of mercury in vaccines, and I guess we could talk about this a little bit, but the mercury in vaccines, I guess, has been such a big deal in the news for the past few decades that a lot of most vaccine producers have decreased the mercury to the point where it never even if you get a bunch of vaccines, you never go above the safety limit per the FDA. Now, we can argue whether or not that that safety limit is an actual safety limit, but at least they're conforming to the mainstream safety limits, except for the flu vaccine. The flu vaccine seems to still keep, I think if I might be able to find it here pretty quick. I think it's still 50 micrograms or 50 milligrams. No, it wouldn't be 50 milligrams. That'd be an insane amount. I think it's 50 micrograms of mercury that still gets put into the flu vaccines. So that's one other thing to keep in mind, that the mercury has been decreased in all vaccines except the flu. Now, I couldn't find it, so you guys can look at it on your own. Go ahead. So, aluminum. He was very interested in aluminum, the author of this book. And one of the things that he's discussing in the end here is that there isn't a single human infant research study that proves the amount of aluminum is safe. Because what he found out is that if you take all the recommended vaccines, all at the same recommended times that the government recommends that a child should take, it exceeds the safety limit of the aluminum that the same government that makes this recommendation says is a safety limit. So he decided to go do the research and see what he dug up. This is what he found. Reading from the book here, this is page 240. I did what any pediatrician would do. I turned to the American Academy of Pediatrics, which published a policy in 1996 called Aluminum Toxicity in Infants and Children. See resources page 308. Here are several key items. 1. Aluminum can cause neurological harm. 2. A study from 30 years ago showed that human adults increase their urine excretion of aluminum when exposed to higher levels. This suggests that adults can clear out excess aluminum. Adults taking aluminum-containing antacids don't build up high levels in their body. I think Tums is an aluminum-containing antacid, so something very common. 4. There have been reports of infants with healthy kidneys showing elevated blood levels of aluminum from taking antacids. 5. People with kidney disease who build up levels of aluminum greater than 100 micrograms per liter in their bloodstream are at risk for toxicity. And 6. The toxic threshold may even be lower than 100 micrograms. And 7. Aluminum loading has been, in tissue buildup, has been seen even in patients with healthy kidneys who receive IV solutions containing aluminum over extended periods. Now, if you're paying attention to that list, you would be thinking what he's about to say here, which is completely absent from this paper was any mention whatsoever of aluminum in vaccines. He mentions this at some point. Why. Yeah, he mentions this at some point in the book that there's a lot of research that's done on the effects of aluminum in the body, but a lot of the research is done on consumed aluminum. Like Tums, like I ate it. And he points this out, and he said from a scientific standpoint, it is 100% ridiculous to take a study on what people eat and translate that to what's injected into people's bodies and how that's going to affect them. And this is even more damning. And again, he doesn't point this out as damning. He just kind of says, well, we need to do some more research. So researchers from the Cochrane Collaboration, which is a group that looks into healthcare issues around the world, did an investigation on aluminum in vaccines and published its findings in Lancet Infectious Diseases in 2004. So this group reviewed all the side effect testing for one particular aluminum-containing vaccine, DTP. That's the DTaP, the one we've been talking about the whole time, and looked for any evidence that it caused more side effects than non-aluminum vaccines. So doing what they were supposed to do, where you single out one variable and look at the difference. Other than more redness, swelling, and pain at the injection site, the Cochrane Collaboration didn't find any indication that aluminum-containing vaccines caused any problems, and therefore concluded that no further research should be undertaken on the topic. Is that the most bizarre scientific statement you can think of, or is it just me?
I mean, yeah, that's basically what a cultist priest would announce to his followers, that there shall be no further inquiry. It's not a dialogue or discussion. It's an announcement from the top down.
Now, and then he's a little bit nicer about it. He says, that's a pretty bold statement. Most researchers will make a conclusion on research finding, but it's unusual to go so far as to say that no one else should do any more research into the matter. Unusual. Interesting adjective to apply to that. Now, here's the most important point that he says.
It's revealing. It's not only unusual; it's very revealing.
Yes.
Why? What are you so scared? What are you so freaked out about?
What's more, he goes on, the Cochrane collaboration didn't actually study aluminum metabolism itself. It didn't test aluminum levels in kids after vaccinations. It didn't explore whether the amount of aluminum in vaccine builds up in the brain or bone tissues. It just looked for evidence of visible symptoms of toxicity. Again, we shot the kid. Did we see anything happen? Without even looking for internal. Without looking at any internal effects. And like you said, they did.
Yeah. But they saw huge red flags, the swelling, etc. But then they just downplay that.
Yeah.
Other than the normal things like swelling and fever and seizures and whatnot, we didn't find anything important, so nothing to see here. So please keep injecting your children with this juice.
Yep. And then to finish up this me reading from this part about aluminum, he goes on a little more that he does find a couple studies, particularly aimed at adults, that had mixed results. Some of them said, okay, this is really bad. Some of them said it's not so bad. But the part that I have highlighted here, which is the most important part, I can't find a single human infant or child study or any large human adult study that demonstrates the safety of injected vaccine aluminum.
Right, so after this book came out, they must have immediately put a halt to all vaccines containing aluminum. It must have been blasted all over the corporate media. It must have been a huge scandal, huge inquiry, huge concern for everyone.
There must have been third-party laboratories testing it all over the world.
It must have been a global scandal of epic proportions.
Yeah.
But, no, there's none of that.
Yeah,
Zero. Instead, we obsess over whether Donald Trump talked to a Russian individual in 2015. Because that's really important.
1955 or however far back they're going. So, I gotta say, after the information that we just gone over, I am not taking the DTaP vaccine. My wife is not taking it. And my child will not be taking it because I am not convinced that A, it's really defending against anything useful, and B, what's actually in there is what they say is in there. Right? Now, I understand that the vaccine that we're looking up right here on this article, this Infanrix Hexa, isn't the same one. It contains the Tdap, but it's not the same as the Tdap that we just looked at the book. DTaP, whatever. But the fact
the burden of proof is on these organizations.
The burden of proof is on these organizations, yeah.
It's hugely on them. They need to meticulously prove that there's no harm done, that the benefits actually accrue. And, until that has occurred, nobody should be injected with this stuff. That would be the normal reaction, in my opinion. That would be what a sane person would conclude.
I concur. And I'm sure we'll get all sorts of anti-vax hate. We're just two crazy anti-vaxxers, but...
Right.
Please
which only goes to prove the point.
Yeah. And just to let everyone know, as I continue being recommended vaccines from our midwife, I will be individually looking at every single one and make an opinion about every single one. I have a feeling I know what I'm going to decide, but I'm still steady back, and I'm going to take the most objective, non-biased look at this stuff as I possibly can. But
Right.
I mean, when I see stuff like this, I mean, it's just terrifying.
Right. I mean, as far as we're concerned, we can just sit back and tell the other people, you showed to us how this is beneficial, not harmful, and I'm happy to be convinced. I'm happy to be talked to like a skeptical adult who has some questions, and I'm happy to change my mind if I see the evidence.
Right.
We could take a look at the notorious anti-vaxxers at the CDC. See what...
What's the CDC again?
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the U.S. government's official health authority.
What, and you called them the anti-vaxxers at the CDC?
Well, I'm joking. They're obviously not that at all.
Joke over my head. Whew.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think let's just see what they have to say about vaccine safety, past and present, in addition to some of the stuff that we just read, just so we can add to the picture. So, and we'll link to this. This is from the CDC.gov. This is the U.S. government's official health authority. They have a page called Historical Vaccine Safety Concerns. And they go through some vaccine horror stories, for lack of a better word, that have occurred throughout history, that since they've been in existence or whatever. So it starts with the Cutter incident, C-U-T-T-E-R, Cutter. That was a company. The Cutter incident from 1955. In 1955, some batches of polio vaccine given to the public contained live polio virus, even though they had passed required safety testing. Over 250 cases of polio were attributed to vaccines produced by one company, Cutter Laboratories. This case, which came to be known as the Cutter incident, resulted in many cases of paralysis. The vaccine was recalled as soon as cases of polio were detected. The Cutter incident was a defining moment in the history of vaccine manufacturing and government oversight of vaccines, and led to the creation of a better system of regulating vaccines. You see, so they always have to put their spin on it. So they made a better vaccine system, and that's their takeaway from this 1955 disaster, where the polio vaccine actually
contained
caused polio. And so they improved everything, and their procedures got so much better that nothing happened again, except there is the simian virus 40 incident from 1955 through 1963. An estimated 10 to 30% of polio vaccines administered in the U.S. were contaminated with simian virus 40. The virus came from monkey kidney cell cultures used to make polio vaccines at that time. Most of the contamination was in the inactivated polio vaccine, but it was also found in oral polio vaccine. After the contamination was discovered, the U.S. government established testing requirements to verify that all new lots of polio vaccines were free of the SV4 virus. Isn't that good? Did they make sure that your vaccines don't contain a cancer virus? Because of research done with SV40 in animal models, there has been some concern that the virus could cause cancer in humans. Yeah, there's actually pretty valid concern on that. But again, this is the typical propaganda spin where they downplay very obviously known facts. However, in most studies looking at the relationship between SV40 and cancers are reassuring, finding no causal association between receipt of SV40 contaminated polio vaccine and development of cancer. No vaccines used today contain SV40 virus. Isn't that great?
Yeah. I mean, one down. How many to go?
But so they obviously fixed it all, and then nothing ever happened. Oh wait, no. Then 1976, the swine flu vaccine and the Guillain-Barré syndrome. In 1976, there was a small increased risk of a serious neurological disorder called the Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, following vaccination. You notice how they put the spin on this already in the first sentence? A small increased risk of some serious neurological disorder causes
serious
paralysis.
Yeah,
Following vaccinations with the swine flu vaccine, the increased risk was approximately one additional case of GBS for every 100,000 people who got the swine flu vaccine. When over 40 million people were vaccinated against swine flu, federal health officials decided that the possibility of an association of GBS with the vaccine, however small, necessitated stopping immunization until the issue could be explored. Deans conducted a thorough scientific review of the issue in 2003 and concluded that people who received the 1976 swine influenza vaccine had an increased risk for developing GBS. Scientists have multiple theories on why this increased risk may have occurred, but the exact reason for this association remains unknown. You see, remains unknown. Today, the CDC continually monitors the safety of seasonal and pandemic flu vaccines, and any possible safety problems are discussed by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. Vaccination is the best way to prevent flu infection, and its complications, and having safe and effective flu vaccines is extremely important. So that's the spin right there in the end again.
Well, yeah, and
never mind. Paralyzed people, and who knows what else.
This is the official government website telling you, like, if they're willing to admit this, what is it that they? Yeah, what if they didn't admit? Holy crap!
Very, very simple. Yeah. And then they obviously put in place this advisory committee, ACIP. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So that was their response then. And that has, of course, since then fixed all potential... Oh, wait, no. There was the rotavirus vaccine and in a subsection in 1998 and 1999. You see, this is not just a past issue. This continues until today. In 1998, the FDA approved RotaShield vaccine, the first vaccine to prevent rotavirus, gastroenteritis. Shortly after it was licensed, developed intussusception, a rare type of bowel obstruction that occurs when the bowel folds in on itself.
When the bowel
after being
folds
vaccinated.
in on itself. That sounds...
No big deal.
I don't know if that's the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, but that's in the running, man.
But it's rare, so never mind. After being vaccinated, at first, it was not clear if the vaccine or some other factor was causing the bowel obstructions. CDC quickly recommended that use of the vaccine be suspended. Yeah, no shit. And immediately started 2 emergency investigations to find out if receiving RotaShield... See, why do they constantly respond to this shit and run around like chickens with their heads cut off? Do they ever ask themselves, should we be doing all this shit in the first place?
Yeah, or I mean, what about completely again, let's just assume that the science fundamentally makes sense. Why aren't we going back and saying, what are the fundamental beginning issues that's even causing us to get in this place to begin with? Right?
Yeah.
What are the testing procedures that we go through to really make sure? Because if these guys in Italy can, again, remember how I explained how difficult it is to find stuff in chemistry, to pop something open and say, okay, there's this much of this. If they can pop it open and run a few tests and be like, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that we don't know. You couldn't do that?
Right.
Like in 70 years, the government couldn't figure out, well, maybe we should do this test that at least tells us that there's something in there that we don't, maybe find something that suggests that there might be something in here that we're unaware of.
You're just a ridiculous anti-vaxxer, and you're a threat to society, you see. So shut up and take your vaccines. Okay. The results, okay, so the CDC quickly started this investigation to find out if receiving causing some of the cases of intussusception. the bowels folding in on themselves, that minor issue. The results of the investigations showed that RotaShield vaccine caused intussusception in some healthy infants younger than 12 months of age, who normally would be at low risk for this condition. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices withdrew its recommendation to vaccinate infants with RotaShield vaccine. Wow. That is impressive right there. And the manufacturer voluntarily withdrew RotaShield. Voluntarily, you see? I mean, why would they do that? Why not just keep force injecting kids with this bowel folding syndrome? But then, obviously at this point, they're not even trying to tell us that they put procedures in place to prevent it all from reoccurring, because it apparently just keeps on reoccurring. For example, in 2009 to 2010, we have the H1N1 vaccine and narcolepsy. An increased risk of narcolepsy, a chronic sleep disorder, was found following vaccination. I think that's where you just randomly fall asleep.
Right.
You might be operating a crane
and then boom,
and just fall asleep. Was found following vaccination with Pandemrix, a monovalent 2009 H1N1 influenza vaccine that was used in several European countries during the H1N1 influenza pandemic.
Are you still reading from the CDC website?
Yeah.
Okay, just occurred to me. I'm like, okay, keep going.
The risk was initially, and then is also detected in association. Pandemrix is manufactured by GlaxoSmithKline in Europe and was specifically produced for pandemic 2009 H1N1 influenza. Pandemrix was never licensed for use in the United States. In 2014, CDC published a study on the association between 2009 H1N1 influenza vaccines, 2010-2011 seasonal influenza vaccines, and narcolepsy. The study found that vaccination was not associated with an increased risk for narcolepsy. So, nothing to see here, except in Europe it caused narcolepsy. And
that's the way drugs work, right? The drugs obey borders. So on one side of the border, a drug might do something, but on the other side, it could do something else.
Right. Well, to that point, they are actually working on genetics-based viruses that can only kill a certain race of people. They are working on that.
Fuck, I was just joking. God damn, dude.
We can get into that in another, but there's official documents where they have discussed this in the high echelons of science, and okay, so then everything was fixed and nothing ever happened. 2010, the porcine circovirus in rotavirus vaccines. The porcine circovirus is a common virus found in pigs. In 2010, it was discovered that both rotavirus vaccines licensed in the US, Rotarix and Rotatech, contained PCV type 1. That's that pig virus that I just mentioned. PCV1 is not known to cause disease in animals or humans. Okay, so it's okay. You can have that pig virus in you. It doesn't really matter. In fact, PCV is common in healthy pigs, and humans are routinely exposed by eating pork. So it's all okay, right? Because humans eat pork with a pig virus in it.
Well, it goes back to what I said. Eating something versus getting it injected into you.
Yeah. Safety monitoring of both vaccines has not shown any reason for concern about PCV. You see, so just inject yourself with a pig virus and don't worry about it, because CDC says they've done safety monitoring, and as we all know, that
like the safety monitoring that I just read about with the aluminum.
Like the safety monitoring after the Qatar incident in 1955, and after the simian virus 40 incident in 1955-63, and the procedures they put in place after the Guillain-Barré syndrome in 1976, and the new procedures after rotavirus vaccine with the bowels folding in on themselves, and the H1N1, but they've got it figured out now, you see? There's no need to worry, and if you have any concerns about vaccines, you are being ridiculous. That is their list. The last entry is from 2013, which was a HPV vaccine recall, where in 2013, Merck and Company recalled one batch of Gardasil HPV vaccine. And then they claim here that it was a precaution following an error in the manufacturing process. And there's actually no reason to do this recall, and everything's fine with the HPV vaccine. Except there's a bunch of other studies about the HPV vaccine that suggest, for example, here's one from the Journal of the American Medical Association that is called Effect of HPV... effect of papilloma 18L1 virus-like particle vaccine among young women with pre-existing infection, a randomized trial from August 2007. And in there, they say there was no evidence that HPV vaccination significantly altered rates of viral clearance. The VEVC estimates overall ranged from minus 0.2% to 2.5% at the 6-month visit, and from minus 3.7% to minus 2% at the 12-month visit. For HPV 16/18 infections, the VEVC estimates were 2.5% at the 6-month visit and minus 2% at the 12-month visit. No significant evidence of a vaccine therapeutic effect was observed in analyses restricted to women who received all doses of vaccine or those with evidence of single HPV infections at entry. So the HPV vaccine is useless at best, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, right? Not to crazy anti-vaxxer Nima or Dylan, but according to the American Medical Association. And there's also a paper called the VRBPAC background document, which is about Gardasil HPV quadrivalent vaccine from May 2006. And we'll link to that also. But that one actually says that a condition called CIN, which is cervical epithelial neoplasia, which I guess is a scientific term for cervical cancer. Oh, actually, a precursor to cervical cancer. So cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, CIN, is a known precursor to cervical cancer. And in this study, they actually conclude that the review team found CIN or worse cases among recipients of Gardasil. Another item for discussion will be the degree to which HVP types not contained in the vaccine might offset the overall clinical effectiveness of the vaccine, or whether findings of CIN or worse among Gardasil recipients might represent the impact of prevalent HPV disease. Gardasil apparently in some cases can cause an increased risk of cervical cancer.
Well,
which is kind of...
in order to make people healthy, it sometimes happens that you make them sick, and that's okay because you're making them more healthy.
Right, because they wear big white coats, and
they said so.
Are gods, and they said so. Yeah, and then of course when it comes to the stuff that you inject people with, or that you allow your kids to be injected with, down to the vial that is used to inject your kid, you should, in my opinion, be very scrutinizing when it comes to what's in there. And it's almost impossible to do unless you take that stuff
and you send it to Italy and have them research it, because apparently it's only happening in Italy.
Apparently they don't have ingredients listed on there, just visible to consumers, like they do for
they do
anything you buy.
They do have the ingredients list listed, but the issue we're finding is what's listed on that list may or may not have anything to do with what's actually in it.
Right, but I don't know that people who go to the Walgreens to get a flu shot are presented with a list of, by the way, this is what's supposed to be in.
Oh yeah, I think
make sure.
I think you got to ask for it, and a lot of times if you ask for it, you get nasty looks from the person giving you the shot.
Right, because you're just a ridiculous anti-vaxxer. So let's talk about this this little issue of contaminated hemophilia blood products. This is from Wikipedia. Contaminated hemophilia blood products were a serious public health problem in the late 1970s up to 1985. These products caused large numbers of hemophiliacs to become infected with HIV and hepatitis C. The companies involved included Alpha Therapeutic Corporation, Institut Mérieux, which is now part of Sanofi, the German Bayer Corporation, and its Qatar Biological Division, Baxter International, and its Highland Pharmaceutical Division. There's Qatar again. Isn't that just hilarious? You have Qatar, who injected people with polio, paralyzed them for the rest of their lives, still alive and kicking in the 70s through the 85s, injecting people with HIV and hepatitis C. And
just to be clear, so we didn't miss it, we're not even talking about a vaccine at this point. We're talking about a hemophilia drug.
Exactly.
However, it's still injected, right?
Factor VIII, which is a protein that helps clotting of blood, etc. But just to make the point that what kind of risk you're exposing yourself to when you allow corporations to inject you with unknown substances. It's not. You have every right to be infinitely skeptical, and any reaction of ridicule and putting you down for that is just a sign of how dogmatic this whole field has become and how dogmatic people have become. Because this default position skepticism, in my opinion, and I think also obviously in Dylan's opinion, who's doing all this research when it comes to his his child that's on the way. And then there's also an article in the New York Times that goes a little more into that HIV incident. Oops. We can post that in the show notes, I guess.
And what we could also post in the show notes? I've opened up some of the newer things on this Vaccinegate on this Italian website.
Yeah.
And in the original article, they said that they're going to do another study, and I guess that was last month, and the next study is out. So I don't want to take the time right now because we're getting pretty deep into this episode. Yeah. But we'll link to this one below as well, because it's I'm reading over it. It's pretty much saying the same thing, where we're finding proteins that weren't supposed to be in there, and we're not finding the ones that were supposed to be in there.
Right.
Is that the end of your list of examples? That was a pretty decent list.
Yeah. No, I think it's horrifying, and people should be outraged at anyone who tries to ridicule people with questions and concerns on this topic.
I agree.
Of what we inject ourselves with, and what we allow governments to legislate and force inject people with in some countries. And in the US, it's going in that direction too. There are people who want...
They soft force it, by saying your kid can't go to school unless you inject it with a vaccine.
There are people who want to make that law. I mean, you have to be a very special kind of mentally ill to demand that people be force injected with substances. I mean, you couldn't have a more stereotypical mad, insane scientist type of archetype than that kind of attitude. It's just ridiculous. But we will keep looking into this, and of course we're always open to feedback and corrections. This has been Amagi, co-hosted by myself, Nima Majur of economicsjunkie.com, and Dylan Moore of the Volitional Science Network, which you can find on YouTube. And we are graciously being hosted by the Think Liberty Network, which you can find at think-liberty.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.